Imagine a 12th century Viking berserker, a highly neurodivergent Silicon Valley hacker, and a broke college student sleeping shoulder to shoulder in the back of an unheated U-Haul truck.
Yeah, it's quite the visual.
It really is. I mean, the temperature outside is hovering around like 20 degrees, and the inside of the truck smells like frozen raw chicken, overheated server racks, and wet animal fur. And this incredibly fractured, freezing trio is tasked with taking down a multi-billion-dollar oil conglomerate.
It is a phenomenal mental image, and honestly, the reality of their situation is somehow even more complex than that snapshot suggests.
Right.
We are looking at a set of primary source materials today, so session logs, character journals, and, deep world-building lore from a very specific, dark, speculative fiction setting.
Which is just fascinating.
It really is. We're basically talking about a modern fantasy universe where supernatural shapeshifters, specifically guru or werewolves,
Yeah.
are fighting this desperate losing war against global corporate ecocide.
And that is exactly what makes these sources so incredibly captivating. Because, you might be listening to this deep dive thinking, oh, okay, a werewolf story.
Right.
Lots of howling at the moon and, like, chasing teenagers through the woods.
Yeah, the classic Hollywood stuff.
Exactly. But you need to throw that preconceived notion out the window right now. Because the operation we are examining today, which is set in early January 2025, it's basically a masterclass in tactical espionage, environmental sabotage, and just brutal internal politics.
It absolutely is. So the objective for this operative team is total deindustrialization.
Wow.
Yeah, total. And the location is a small, rural, industrial town in Pennsylvania called Little Meadows. And the enemy here, it isn't some guy with silver bullets. The enemy is a suffocating corporate monolith.
So to break a corporate chokehold that tight, I mean, you would naturally assume you need an incredibly synchronized, perfectly oiled machine of an operative team, right?
You would think so, yeah.
But looking at these logs, that is the exact opposite of what they have. I mean, they are a mess. But before we get into the psychology of this highly volatile pack of operatives, we really have to understand the battlefield they've walked into. So what exactly is happening in Little Meadows?
Well, Little Meadows is basically the textbook definition of a modern company town, but it is dialed up to a dystopian extreme.
Right.
The town has been completely swallowed by an entity known as Vern and Yang Resource Management, or W&Y for short. And they operate in tandem with this conglomerate called King Distillery and Breweries.
Okay, so it's a joint effort.
Exactly. But to understand how insidious this actually is, we really have to look at the mechanics of resource control here. Because this isn't just a corporation building a factory and, offering jobs to the locals.
Right, it goes way deeper than that.
Way deeper. W&Y has essentially bulldozed the local economy and replaced it with a closed loop that feeds entirely back into its own pockets.
Wait, but how do you even pull that off in 2025? I mean, if I live in Little Meadows, what stops me from just, like, driving to the next town over to buy my groceries?
Yeah.
Or just ordering things online?
Okay.
How does a company actually trap a population in the modern era?
Through the absolute weaponization of infrastructure, the sources detail how W&Y has systematically restricted road access.
Really?
Yeah. They control the local highways and the toll roads. So if an outside vendor, say, an independent produce supplier or some national delivery service wants to bring goods into Little Meadows, W&Y hits them with exorbitant private tolls
Oh, wow.
and massive bureaucratic red tape, so it becomes financially unviable for any external supply chains to operate there at all.
That is wild.
And at the same time, W&Y has constructed these massive corporate shanty towns.
Shanty towns, like in modern-day Pennsylvania.
Basically, yeah. They are these quick-build, long-row homes and trailer parks that are situated deliberately close to the industrial sites, meaning the workers literally live exactly where they toil.
So they control the physical movement. You can't leave easily, and outside goods can't get in.
Precisely. And that brings us to the psychological breakdown of the townspeople, which the operatives actually witness firsthand. There is this deeply unsettling scouting trip recorded in the logs.
Oh, right, the bar scene.
Yes. One of the operatives, this human passing mediator named Artie, goes into the local watering hole, this place called the Whitetail, and he sits down at the bar and just orders a simple, mundane meal, a Coca-Cola and a hamburger.
And what he gets is essentially a masterclass in how corporate monopolization strips away your basic human agency.
Exactly. The bartender, a local woman named Sarah, is deeply apologetic. She tells him she can't serve him a real Coca-Cola. The only thing she is allowed to stock is this generic off-brand syrup called Sinestro Cola.
Which just sounds terrible.
Right. It comes in a plastic bottle, it's overly sweet, and crucially, it is manufactured and distributed by King Distillery and Breweries, the exact conglomerate partnering with W&Y.
And Artie asks us about the food, and it's the exact same story, right?
It is. Sarah can't get fresh meat or produce delivered. She is literally forced to serve frozen Bubba patties and frozen French fries that she has to buy directly from the local Walmart.
And the Walmart is compromised too.
Completely. The sources note the Walmart has been entirely captured and curated to serve only the W&Y company town ecosystem.
Now, if you're listening, just consider the psychological weight of that. I mean, it seems trivial at first, right? It's just a bad soda and a frozen burger. But from a sociological perspective, taking away those micro-choices from a population is how you break their spirit.
It's death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly. When a corporation controls everything down to the literal ketchup you put on your burger, the townspeople are receiving this subconscious message every single time they eat. Like, you own nothing, you control nothing, we sustain you.
Yeah, Sarah is essentially held hostage in her own business because if she tries to bypass W&Y's local supply chain manager, who is this guy named Jeffrey, she risks losing her business entirely. It is total dietary and economic subjugation.
So if a corporation has its tentacles wrapped that tightly around a town, where they manage the security patrols, the housing, and the syrup and the soda, how does a covert operative team even exist in that space without sticking out immediately? I mean, the town's ecosystem must be designed to violently reject foreign bodies.
It absolutely is, and that is exactly why the operatives realize they cannot fight a war of attrition against the town itself. They can't just fight every security guard. They have to identify the architects of the system and surgically remove them.
Right, cut off the head of the snake.
Exactly. So through their early surveillance, they map out the corporate hierarchy. They identify Jack Hummett, who handles downstream operations, and Cluster Main, who manages logistics. But the real physical embodiment of the environmental rot they are fighting is the VP of Integrated Asset Management, a man named Thomas Clench.
And the sources paint a vividly grotesque picture of this guy. I mean, he's described as this oily, bulbous man, but honestly, it's his vehicle that really caught my attention.
Oh, the G-Wagon.
Yes. He drives this massive, lifted, exhaust-belching G-Wagon, and it's not just a big car. It is specifically modified to roll coal, meaning it deliberately dumps thick, black, toxic diesel smoke into the air everywhere he goes.
The psychology behind that vehicle is just fascinating, isn't it? Because in this universe, where environmental decay is a literal, tangible, spiritual poison, Clench's G-Wagon is essentially a rolling middle finger to the planet.
Truly.
But it's also a display of untouchable power. The vehicle is so massive and lifted that it actually has to lower itself on hydraulics just to allow this bulbous executive to slither inside.
It's disgusting.
It is. It projects complete dominance over the local populace. He is polluting their air simply because he can, and no one in Little Meadows has the authority to stop him.
So we have this monolithic, highly organized enemy. Wern and Yang operates with complete corporate precision. You would think our operatives would need to be equally unified, like a perfectly synchronized special forces unit.
You would certainly hope so. But the reality is that this operative team is an operational powder keg. They are united by a common enemy, sure, but they are divided by profound differences in ideology, methodology, and just basic biology.
So let's break down who is actually sitting in that freezing U-Haul truck.
Yeah.
The sources highlight 5 key members, and every single one brings a completely conflicting worldview to the table. Let's start with Eagle.
Okay, so Eagle represents the traditional visceral side of the guru. He is a shapeshifter who prefers to spend the vast majority of his time in his wolf form, which the lore specifically calls the Lucas form.
Okay.
To Eagle, the natural world isn't some abstract concept to be protected from afar. It is his immediate physical reality. But Eagle is carrying a really heavy burden into this mission. The logs indicate that just prior to arriving in Little Meadows, he suffered a series of humiliating physical beatings from his tribal chief.
Wait, I have to ask, if they're on a high-stakes corporate sabotage mission, why is a physical fistfight with his boss relevant to the logistics at all?
Because you have to remember, they operate in a society built entirely around pack hierarchy and physical dominance. A loss like that isn't just a bad day at the office. It physically and psychologically diminishes you.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the sources note that Eagle tells the team the defeat lingers. He is a massively powerful apex predator who has been publicly stripped of his alpha status, so he is desperate to prove himself, to regain his honor through combat.
So he's got something to prove.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Consequently, his default setting for literally every problem in Little Meadows is immediate, violent physical action. He doesn't want to hack the oil refinery. He wants to rip the steel pipes apart with his bare hands.
And sitting right next to this violently frustrated traditionalist is Edwin, or Sasha, as he's also known. And Edwin could not be more different if he tried.
Not at all. Edwin is the team's tech specialist. He belonged to a specific faction in the lore called the Glasswalkers. Now, for the listener who might not be deep into this universe, the Glasswalkers are a massive anomaly.
Right, they break all the rules.
They do. While most shapeshifters view human cities and technology as a corrupting blight, the Glasswalkers adapted. They revere the city. They use technology, hacking, and modern finance as their primary weapons.
So you basically have a werewolf who's essentially an IT specialist.
Exactly. And Edwin is profoundly uncomfortable in this rural, freezing, nature-heavy environment. The woods of Pennsylvania offer him zero comfort. Furthermore, the sources explicitly note that Edwin is on the autism spectrum.
Which adds a whole other layer of difficulty for him here.
It does. The sudden shift to this highly unpredictable environment surrounded by a group of strangers out in the freezing cold, it's causing him intense sensory overload. So he is retreating into what he knows, drones, Starlink satellite connections, and cyber warfare.
Trying to get a traditionalist wolf like Aegel to understand a glasswalker like Edwin just seems impossible. It's honestly like forcing a Silicon Valley cybersecurity expert to do a group project with a Viking berserker.
That's a perfect way to put it.
I mean, they both want to win the war, but one wants to write a computer virus, and the other wants to literally bite the enemy's throat out.
That is an excellent analogy, and it perfectly captures the tension in that truck. Bridging the gap between them falls to Artie.
Artie.
Yes, Artie is the team's mediator. Unlike Eagle, Artie is entirely human passing. He plays the role of a middle-class college student, which functionally he actually is, and he is navigating this incredibly dangerous sabotage mission on a very tight personal budget.
The mundane details of Artie's role are just hilarious to me. Like, they are fighting a cosmic war for the soul of the planet, and Artie is at the local Walmart buying rotisserie chickens and canned chilies because the ancient apex predators in his team don't have any money and are literally starving in the woods.
It's so grounding, isn't it? He is the logistical glue. He operates through social engineering, empathy, and calculated conversation. He's the one who goes to the bar and talks to Sarah.
Right.
He views the mission strategically, constantly advocating for patience, information gathering, and blending in. But Artie's attempts at mediation are constantly undermined by the deeper historical rifts within the team, particularly when we look at Havel and Matsun Papaluani.
Yes, Matsun Papaluani's background in these sources absolutely blew my mind.
It is arguably the darkest piece of lore influencing this specific mission. So both Havel and Matsun Papaluani are deeply tied to nature. They belong to factions that inherently distrust modern technology. But Matsun Papaluani, who comes from the Okatana lineage, carries a very specific, horrific historical trauma.
Right. The sources detail this period where tech-focused operatives, specifically Glasswalkers, which is the exact same faction as Edwin the Hacker, they went rogue.
Yes. According to the internal history of this universe, there was an era where certain tech-obsessed Glasswalkers captured members of more traditional tribes, specifically the Wendigo. And they didn't just capture them, they forcibly, cybernetically augmented them.
It's just so grim.
It's awful. They amputated limbs and replaced them with machinery. They wired technology directly into their nervous systems, essentially turning these deeply spiritual creatures into literal cyborg abominations. And it sparked a massive bloody war between the factions.
That is pure biological and spiritual horror. So when Edwin pulls out a drone, or suggests using a satellite connection, Matsun Papaluani isn't just annoyed by the glowing screen.
No, not at all.
He is looking at the ideological descendant of the exact people who mutilated his ancestors.
Exactly. He refers to Edwin's technology as Weaver bullshit.
Weaver bullshit.
Yeah. In their cosmology, the Weaver is the cosmic force of order, technology, and stasis, which has essentially grown cancerous and is choking the natural world. So to Matsun Papaluani, Edwin's laptop isn't just a tool, it is a literal spiritual violation.
Wow. And finally, rounding out this absolute mess of a team, we have Chen.
Yes. Chen belongs to the Stargazers, which is a faction known for asceticism, philosophy, and generally having a very calm demeanor. Chen is a doctor, he's deeply philosophical, but also just ruthlessly practical.
I really noticed that pragmatism in the logs. Because later in the sources, when a literal shootout happens at the bar, Artie tries to play peacemaker, but Chen just turns around and walks out the door.
Because Chen calculates risk. He isn't there to save a random local if doing so jeopardizes the anonymity of the entire team. He is the cold, philosophical anchor.
So if you step back and look at this group as a whole, you have intense historical trauma, completely conflicting methodologies, sensory overload, and shattered egos.
And a recipe for disaster.
It would be a nightmare to manage even if they were just regular humans in an office. But as the sources reveal, they aren't just dealing with bad moods. They're dealing with a biological, supernatural metric known as rage.
This is perhaps the most crucial mechanic to understand about their operations. When the sources use the word rage, and it's capitalized, they are not using a metaphor for anger.
Right.
Rage is a quantifiable, volatile, supernatural force that literally burns inside their veins. It is the primal fury of the earth itself, weaponized within their biology.
Okay, stop right there for a second. How does that actually function in practice? Because in my head, I'm just picturing a guy who really needs anger management classes. How does supernatural rage physically manifest for them?
Okay, imagine trying to perform microscopic brain surgery while your body is reacting to a 4-alarm fire.
Oh, wow.
Your adrenaline is totally maxed out. Your heart rate is at 180 beats per minute. Your muscles are literally twitching with the imperative to fight or flee. And your rational frontal cortex is being screamingly overridden by your amygdala. That is baseline rage.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. It grants them explosive physical power, but it severely limits their capacity for long-term, rational, strategic thinking. Rage demands immediate, violent release.
And the sources note that right now, out in that truck, their rage is spiking off the charts.
Yes, because they are being hit by a perfect storm of triggers. We already mentioned the psychological triggers. Eagle's lingering humiliation from his beating, and Edwin's intense sensory overload from the cold and the chaotic environment. But there is also a massive environmental trigger at play here.
The moon.
Exactly. It is early January 2025, and the moon over Little Meadows is in a crescent phase.
And why does that matter?
Well, in the supernatural endocrinology of the Garu, different moon phases artificially inflate different aspects of their biology. A crescent moon phase specifically triggers their predatory, aggressive instincts.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it inflates their rage even further. They are biologically pumped full of supernatural adrenaline that they cannot just turn off.
So how does a covert operation survive when every single operative biologically wants to rip the doors off the hinges?
Well, that is the central conflict of the early mission logs. We see this explicitly in a debate over how to handle the W and Y oil infrastructure. The aggressive members of the pack, who are driven by this internal pressure, want to just walk right into the oil refinery and start smashing the machinery. It is a purely primal impulse. See the threat, destroy the threat.
Right, but Artie and Edwin immediately push back on that, and Artie points out a massive, catastrophic flaw in that plan. I mean, if you are an environmental terrorist and you run into an active oil pipeline facility and indiscriminately start tearing open steel pipes with your claws out of sheer anger, what happens?
You create a spill.
Exactly. You create a massive toxic oil spill. You are literally causing the exact ecological disaster you came to Little Meadows to prevent.
It is the ultimate paradox of their existence. They possess the sheer physical power to level a corporate building in minutes, but using that power undermines their actual spiritual and environmental goals.
Which has to be incredibly frustrating.
Beyond frustrating. Furthermore, Edwin points out the logistical failure of a frontal assault. If you break a pipeline, W&Y has the capital to fix it in a month. And when they do, the security will be doubled. You haven't cured the disease, you've just aggravated the symptom.
Plus, leaving a trail of dead security guards and thousands of gallons of spilled crude oil brings immediate local, state, and federal attention. A covert team trying to stay under the radar cannot survive an FBI manhunt and a CNN media circus. They have to suppress their most basic biological instincts just to survive.
They really do, and this tension forces them to find a compromise, which actually shows a glimmer of highly functional teamwork. They realize they cannot attack the infrastructure directly, so they pivot to attacking the human element running it. But they do it in a way that avoids explosive violence.
Okay, so what's the plan?
They learn that all the corporate employees, from the executives down to the roughnecks, eat at a centralized company cafeteria.
And this is where the traditional, nature-based skills of Matsun Papalani and Eagle actually become incredibly valuable for a stealth operation.
Precisely. Motts and Papalawani suggest bypassing modern weapons entirely and using the natural environment against the corporation. He suggests foraging for local toxic plants, specifically looking for something akin to a fake death cap mushroom to introduce into the cafeteria's food supply.
Wait, hold on. I have to play devil's advocate here. They are eco-warriors trying to save the environment, but their grand compromise is to biologically poison a cafeteria full of blue-collar workers. How do they justify that to themselves?
It is a really dark, ethical, gray area, but from a purely tactical standpoint, it is a brilliant strategic pivot. They aren't trying to orchestrate a mass casualty event, they are aiming for mass incapacitation.
Okay.
If they can induce severe, sweeping food poisoning across the entire workforce, the refinery and the logistics chains just grind to a halt naturally. It looks like a massive health code violation, not a supernatural terrorist attack. It buys them time and strips W&Y of its operational manpower without drawing the FBI.
And the sources note that Eagle actually goes out into the freezing January woods and successfully forages poison oak and various toxic mushrooms. It's fascinating because it allows Eagle to channel his predatory destructive instincts into a task, hunting and gathering poison, but he deploys it as a slow burn strategy rather than a violent outburst.
Right. Controlling their rage is step one. Step two is actually finding a way to scout the enemy and locate their specific targets without triggering a town-wide panic. And this brings us to the boots-on-the-ground reality of intelligence gathering in Little Meadows. To put it bluntly, it is an absolute logistical nightmare.
Let's talk about the physical environment first. You have a team of werewolves. You would think scouting a rural town would be easy, just turn into a wolf and run through the trees, right?
In theory, yes. The lupine members of the team heavily prefer to operate in their natural wolf forms. It is faster, it's stealthier in the underbrush, and infinitely more comfortable for them than walking on two legs. But there is a massive geographic problem. They are in Pennsylvania. Wild wolves were hunted to extinction in Pennsylvania over a century ago.
Right, so if Eagle decides to scout the perimeter of the W&Y corporate parking lot as a massive 150-pound timber wolf, he is not blending in at all. The locals might briefly assume it's a giant coyote, but the absolute moment they realize it's a wolf, the town goes into panic mode.
Yeah, you'd have animal control, local hunters, and heavily armed corporate security out in force immediately.
Exactly. The physical reality of the Pennsylvania ecosystem actively rejects their primary, most comfortable mode of scouting. So they were forced to rely on human disguises or technology. But the digital environment is just as hostile as the physical one.
It really is. Edwin, the tech specialist, he tries to do something we all do every single day, a basic web search. He wants to look up the corporate hierarchy of the oil refinery, but he can't.
Because they are in an isolated rural chokehold.
Yes. The local 4G cell tower connection is just abysmal. It's likely completely neglected by W&Y because it doesn't serve their industrial needs.
Wow.
Edwin cannot even load a basic web page. His entire arsenal of cyber warfare is rendered utterly useless by a buffering screen.
It is such a jarring, funny image.
Yeah.
You have these ancient, supernatural apex predators, and they are completely stonewalled by a lack of bars on their cell phone.
It really is funny. But it forces Edwin to take a massive risk. He actually has to hike deep into the freezing woods, clear a line of sight to the sky, and physically set up a dedicated Starlink satellite terminal just to get enough bandwidth to run a basic search.
Which takes him out of his element even more.
Exactly. It exposes him to the cold and the risk of visual discovery. But despite these massive physical and digital hurdles, the team does manage to pull off two incredibly tense, memorable scouting attempts.
We touched briefly on the first one earlier, which was the visit to the Whitetail Bar by Artie and Chen.
Yes. This scene is a brilliant execution of social engineering by Artie. He goes into this hostile, locals-only company bar and plays his role perfectly. He adopts the persona of a nervous, eager college kid who has just arrived in town for an engineering interview with W&Y. He buys the terrible Sinestro Cola. He eats the frozen Bubba Patty, and he uses calculated flattery and feigned naivete to get Sarah, the bartender, to just open up.
He gets her talking about the supply chain, the tolls, the exact mechanics of how W&Y is strangling the town. But the situation devolves rapidly.
Yeah.
And not because of anything Artie does wrong, but because the town itself is a pressure cooker ready to explode.
Exactly. While Artie is extracting information, there is this old man at the end of the bar. And the sources note he has been drinking an absolute fortress of cheap King Distillery lagers.
Yeah.
As Sarah complains about the corporate takeover, about Jeffrey the supply manager, and about the economic despair, you can see the old man getting more and more agitated.
Why does he snap, though? Is it just the alcohol?
The alcohol removes his inhibitions, definitely, but the root cause is the psychological toll of the company town we discussed earlier. This old man represents the crushed spirit of Little
Oh,
Meadows.
I see.
He is trapped in a town where he has no future, no money, and no agency. And he's forced to drink the very conglomerate beer that is keeping him impoverished. The ambient despair of the environment literally drives him insane.
And he completely loses his mind. He goes on a drunken, violent rampage right there in the bar. Artie, true to his role as the mediator, actually tries to de-escalate it. He steps in, raises his hands, and tries to use his empathy, saying something like, "Hey, buddy, let's calm down. Nobody wants to hurt you."
But words are utterly useless against that level of systemic despair. The old man attacks. He pulls a weapon and stabs another patron.
God.
A gun goes off. The quiet, mundane bar instantly devolves into a chaotic, bloody brawl.
And this is exactly where Chen's cold pragmatism is put on full display. Chen is a stargazer, but more importantly, he's a trained medical doctor. There was a man bleeding out on the floor of the bar. What does Chen do?
He turns around and walks out the back door.
It is incredibly cold.
It is cold, but it is tactically flawless. Chen knows that if they stay to administer first aid, the local police, who are likely in the pocket of W and Y, will arrive. They will take statements. Artie and Chen will have to show IDs. Their physical descriptions will be entered into a local database. They will exist in the system. The golden rule of covert operations is anonymity. Chen sacrifices the life of a random local to protect the integrity of the mission. They flee into the night.
Wow. Meanwhile, the second successful scouting attempt relies on the exact opposite approach. While Artie is using social engineering, Edwin is relying entirely on his Weaver bullshit technology.
Edwin is tasked with tracking Thomas Clinch, the VP of Asset Management with the massive G-Wagon. But following a vehicle like that in a rural town is incredibly difficult. If you try to tail him in another car, you will be spotted instantly because there is barely any traffic.
So Edwin uses a drone, but he doesn't just fly it behind the car, right? Because the battery would die or it would be spotted. He does something incredibly clever.
He does. He takes a tiny GPS-equipped self-navigating drone. And while the G-Wagon is parked at the corporate office, Edwin flies the drone over and lands it directly flat on the roof of the vehicle.
It's brilliant because that G-Wagon is lifted so high on its suspension that the roof is nearly 7 feet off the ground. Nobody, not even Clench, is tall enough to see a tiny piece of black plastic resting on the roof rack.
Exactly. When Clinch finally leaves the office, rolling coal and blasting music, the drone just passively rides on the roof.
Hitching a ride.
Exactly. Edwin tracks the GPS signal via his Starlink connection from the woods. He successfully tracks Clench all the way to his private residence within the corporate shantytown without ever risking a physical tail.
Okay, I have to pause here because the juxtaposition of this entire operation is just breaking my brain. We have high-stakes social engineering resulting in a barroom stabbing. We have GPS drones secretly tracking corrupt oil executives. This sounds like a multi-million-dollar CIA black site operation. But where is the command center for this elite team?
The command center is the back of an unheated U-Haul truck parked in the frozen mud.
It is so absurd. Half the team is literally sleeping on the metal floor of a moving truck in 20-degree weather.
It highlights the gritty, desperate reality of their resistance. They don't have corporate backing. Artie went to Walmart and bought cheap blankets, a camp stove, and raw chicken just to keep them from starving to death.
Yeah.
The inside of this truck is a chaotic mess of server racks, zip ties, drone batteries, and frozen meat. The truck itself is essentially a rolling refrigerator in the January cold.
Right, so while Edwin is typing on a glowing laptop, Eagle is likely shivering in the corner, forced to shift back and forth into his wolf form just to generate enough body heat to survive the night. And this profound physical and ideological friction between Artie's social maneuvering, Edwin's high-tech drones, and Eagle's raw, shivering survivalism, it inevitably boils over into the ultimate debate within the team. How do they actually strike the enemy?
This is the great debate of the source material, technology versus raw physical force.
Let's look at Edwin's plan first. Edwin has a very clear, very modern, and very quiet plan to cripple Wern and Yang.
He does. Edwin has coded a piece of malware, specifically a remote access Trojan, or a RIT. And he loads this RIT onto a standard, unassuming USB stick.
Okay.
To ensure it gets used, he wraps the USB in a bright yellow sticky note with the words whistleblower documents written on it.
It's the oldest trick in the cybersecurity playbook. It relies entirely on human curiosity.
Exactly. The goal is simple. Drop the infected USB stick near the door of the executive office. Someone, whether a janitor, a secretary, or an executive, will find it.
And they won't be able to resist.
Right. Human nature dictates they will plug it into a company computer just to see what the documents are, and the moment they do, the R8 executes. And Edwin will have total, undetectable backdoor access to W&Y's internal network.
From a tactical standpoint, what are the pros and cons of this approach?
Well, the pros are massive. It offers absolute physical safety. Edwin doesn't even need to be in the same zip code once the malware is deployed. He can monitor the command and control server via his Starlink connection from the absolute safety of the woods.
Which is great.
Yeah, and it also offers deep systemic damage. He could potentially shut down the pipeline valves remotely, delete financial records, or expose their illegal practices to the press without ever throwing a punch.
But the cons?
It leaves a digital footprint. A skilled corporate cybersecurity team could trace the RAT back to its origin. But honestly, the most significant con is internal. The traditionalists on the team, so Eagle, Havalval, and Papalawani, absolutely despise this plan.
And Edwin pushes his luck even further, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Because he wants to map out the physical layout of the corporate compound, so he suggests a frankly hilarious plan. He wants to strap a GoPro camera to the head of one of the wolves and have them run through the facility.
He does, and that is where Papalawani draws an absolute non-negotiable hard line.
Why, though? I mean, to us, strapping a GoPro to a dog is just a funny YouTube video. Why is it such a massive insult to him?
Because of the cultural concept of the veil.
Yeah.
To Papalawani, the ability to shift into a wolf isn't just a biological mechanism. It is a sacred, spiritual state given to them by the earth to protect the natural order.
Right.
To take a piece of Weaver bullshit, basically a mass-produced plastic surveillance camera built in a factory, and strap it to the head of a sacred creature is an ideological desecration.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is mingling the purity of their ancient form with the exact mechanical corruption they are fighting against. He flat out rejects it.
So the GoPro scouting mission is dead. But they still need to deliver Edwin's infected USB stick to the executive office. And this is where the two diametrically opposed methodologies, the high-tech hacker and the ancient monster, are forced into the most uncomfortable, hilarious marriage possible.
Because Edwin, for all his digital brilliance, is physically incapable of sneaking close enough to the heavily guarded executive building to place the USB stick himself.
Right, he's a hacker, not a ninja.
Exactly. He would be spotted instantly by the perimeter security. He needs the pack's raw physical force.
So to deliver this tiny 1-ounce piece of plastic flash drive, Eagle, the traditionalist who hates losing, hates machines, and hates the Weaver, has to do the heavy lifting. And he doesn't just walk up in his human form, does he? He has to undergo a massive physical transformation.
He does. The sources detail that Eagle shifts into what is known as the glabro form.
Explain the mechanics of the glabro form, because this isn't just turning into a regular wolf, is it?
No, it is far more horrifying. The glabro form is an intermediate state between human and wolf.
Okay.
Imagine a human being stretching. Their bones are loudly cracking and reknitting. Their muscle mass is literally doubling. Thick hair is erupting across their skin, their jaw extends slightly, and their teeth sharpen. It is a hulking, monstrous, brutalist form designed for sheer physical leverage and intimidation.
And Eagle undergoes this agonizing, bone-cracking biological transformation in the freezing woods, turning into a literal monster from a nightmare. For what purpose?
Just so he has the sheer, terrifying physical power to wind up his arm and throw a tiny plastic USB stick from the absolute edge of the tree line over the security fences with enough speed and accuracy to land it precisely near the front door of the executive office.
I am absolutely obsessed with this image. It is like using a massive diesel-powered bulldozer to carefully plant a single delicate tulip. You have this terrifying ancient apex predator doing the physical labor of delivering an IT virus.
It perfectly encapsulates the dynamic of this team. It is a necessary, if absurd, marriage. Because if you think about it, the malware only gets to the door because of the monster's supernatural throwing arm.
Right.
And the monster only knows which door to throw it at because of the hacker's drone intelligence. Neither side, the traditionalist nor the technologist, can accomplish this mission alone. They are utterly dependent on the very philosophies they despise.
And yet, Even with the USB successfully deployed into the corporate ecosystem, the tension doesn't just dissipate. The team is still terrified of their own rage. They are still terrified of causing massive collateral damage to the townspeople of Little Meadows and triggering a massive armed security response. So they make one final, crucial strategic pivot for their first actual physical strike.
Right. They realize that attacking the oil field in the absolute center of town is simply too hot. It is too public.
Too risky.
The risk of an explosive environmental disaster or mass civilian casualties is just too high. So instead, they look at the map and leverage their natural advantage.
They target the lumberyard.
Yes. WNY operates an isolated lumberyard on the absolute outskirts of the deep forest. If lumber workers suddenly go missing, or if massive logging equipment mysteriously breaks down deep in the remote woods, it is far less suspicious than an explosion in the center of Little Meadows.
That makes total sense.
Out in the trees, the Garou have the upper hand. They are choosing a battleground where the shadows, the isolation, and their primal nature work for them, rather than against them.
It is a strategic retreat from the modern world, essentially pulling the enemy back into the dark woods where the monsters actually live. And that is exactly where our sources leave us for today. The team is bundled up in the freezing U-Haul, their rage simmering just below the surface, plotting a devastating strike on the lumberyard at dawn.
It's quite the cliffhanger.
It really is. So we want to thank you, the listener, for coming along on this incredibly intense exploration today. We've spent this time pulling apart the mechanics of a team, balancing on an absolute razor's edge. They are fighting a corrupt corporate behemoth that has literally poisoned a town's land, its food, and the minds of its people. Yet, as we've deeply analyzed today, their biggest obstacle isn't Thomas Clench, or his rolling coal G-Wagon, or the corporate security patrols. Their biggest obstacle might just be their own internal friction. It's the struggle of managing their biological, supernatural rage and trying to bridge the massive, traumatic gap between ancient instinct and modern cyber warfare.
It is a delicate, often hypocritical balance. And as we conclude our analysis of these sources, it leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling question to mull over.
Let's hear it.
Well, we have talked extensively about how the team is desperately trying to avoid causing a physical environmental disaster like an oil spill while dismantling the WNY Corporation. But consider the spiritual and psychological toll of their chosen methods. If they succeed in destroying Vernon Yang using the very same toxic manipulative tools of the modern world, deploying insidious malware, utilizing social deception, and quite literally poisoning the workers' food supply with toxic mushrooms, do they risk becoming infected by the very corruption they're trying to eradicate? When you fight a monster in the mud, how do you stop yourself from becoming the exact same kind of dirt?
Wow. That is something that will definitely stick with you long after this deep dive is over. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack this incredible lore